Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known Damon now for about 8 or 10 years. We've been connecting on and off in various venues. He hosted a AEC Hackathon back in 2016 here in Austin. And I participated as one of the industry experts or industry peers, hoping to influence what some of the technical people were doing. I thought it was a great experience. I was hoping to get a chance to interact and do that more often. I'm still hoping I can in the future, and I think this is a great opportunity for not just myself, but for other people to get involved where it might have been difficult before with specific locations. But don't get me wrong, I still like the idea of specific locations. I like doing things, in person in one location. But we'll see how this all shakes out. I've got a positive attitude towards it, and I hope you do too. So I'm here today. Damon and I were talking about, how could I participate this time? And to be frank, I didn't want to talk about technology. I've been involved with this now for about 30 years, and my background comes from an architectural background. I've always been involved with how technology is applied in practice from the early CAD days. I think the first version of AutoCAD I used was like version 2.6 or 2.64 or something like that. IBM ATs with the dual hard drives, or a single hard drive and floppy drives, excuse me, a single floppy, and we mean 5 1/4, not a 3 1/2, 8 or 16 color screens. I've been involved with software development and marketing, spent 12 years working with Vectorworks, and I've also spent the last 15 years really dealing with standards development through the efforts of buildingSMART International, buildingSMART Alliance, and the US, and now the new buildingSMART USA chapter. And so having all of that sort of technology and practice background, I feel like now in my career, what I'm more interested about is people, processes. What are the things that how technology is used or applied? How can it influence these other things? And I think the key thing for us to remember is that, the difference between how solutions are solved, whether I'm using technology or I'm affecting people, I think makes a difference in what the solutions really look like and how they behave and how they act. Technology is always changing. It's very mutable. There's always the shifting as to, well, what's the latest that we know in terms of science, in terms of languages, in terms of applications. And it's getting easier and easier and easier in order to implement technology to create tools in order to solve problems, right? And usually they're remedial issues, right? It's how do I become more efficient? How do I, make something work that didn't work before? How do I connect things? And it can be a bit messy, right? And but the messiness is usually because there's a lot of different parts and pieces, and it's just trying to decide what to use and what to activate in order to create a solution. So really, as I've witnessed it in terms of our own industry, is that the technology is creating conveniences, but is it really truly transformative? I know we've talked a lot about BIM, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but is it truly transformative? Have we really changed the way we do everything? Not just a few things, but everything in our industry. And so if I look at the other side of it, the people side of it, this is where I think the greatest potential is in changing everything. And it's yet the thing that we've focused on the least, right? And why is that? Because it's a hard nut to crack, right? People are slow to change. They're difficult to change. It requires so much effort for that change to happen, whether that's through education or debate and changing minds. because people have egos and opinions, and they have prejudices that are based on education and experiences. And while there are lots of options out there in terms of technology, I think the thing that we keep forgetting that, when people are involved, ultimately what we're trying to do is the right thing, is the one right thing to do. Now, there might be a few variations about what that right thing is, but usually there's the right thing. And there's lots of wrong ways of doing things, but usually there's a right way, a right thing to do. And when you begin to address the people side of things, when you begin to address our processes and our systems and our practices, that's where true transformation occurs, right? How do then you transform an industry into being data-centric and technology-centric? So, I called this Counterpoint and Challenge, but we have to start with the point. The point is that, the AEC Hackathon has been now going on for 7 years. And it's a great opportunity for people to take technology, take tools, take ideas from other industries and from other places, and begin to figure out ways they can address the problems that we have in our own industry. But we tend to make a lot of assumptions, right? And to me, there's 3 major assumptions. We tend to think that, oh, well, this problem is the same problem everybody has. Everybody's got the same problem. Problem is not everybody's starting from the same point of view, or the same point in their business or process, or same expertise. And then there's the second assumption that your solution is somehow different than any other solutions other people might have come up with, because the chances are somebody's already thought of it before. I mean, I think we live in this age now where so much past is behind us that we have to recognize that, sometimes we say there's nothing new under the sun. It's just, whether you choose to see it or not, or how you put things together. I still think that's relatively true. But I think that even the biggest assumption, the one that I think I have the greatest problem with, is thinking that the problems are solved with technology, or at least a better idea of technology. And it's not to say that they aren't a part of the solution, but they're just a part of it, right? And so, when we look at it from that point of view, how do we move forward? So as I said before, AEC Hackathon, 7 years, 42 events, all over the world. A bit heavy with 4 locations. So Seattle, London, Helsinki, and Shanghai have each hosted 4 times. And then Silicon Valley, there's been 3 times. There's a few locations that have had a couple of them, and then all the rest just a single event, which is great. That means that Damon and the others, the board of directors, all the other enablers have spread the word and been able to reach a large number of people all around the globe that agree and say, hey, where can we use technology to solve these problems? How can we think of technology different in solving these problems? How can we combine them and make them different? And there's been hundreds of projects, and unfortunately, a lot of this is cataloged on YouTube. You go to the YouTube channel for AEC Hackathon, and you can begin to see what other people have done in the past, and what were the challenges that were posed, and what were the tools that were offered them to meet those challenges, and what were the ways that maybe they decide to take on a different challenge. And I just think that's interesting, is where people, when they come to the table, take their own experiences and subjective points of view and say, well, this is what I really think I should be doing. So to me, then the bigger question is well, this is great. All of these projects that have been done and shown are awesome, but how many of them really lead to something that's an even bigger change in our industry? And I don't mean just spinning off into being another company and another product that's offered to the world. Don't get me wrong, that's great. But is it fundamentally changing the things that we know are wrong with our industry, and why we keep pounding on, creating more tools and creating better tools in order to make things work better? So, as I said before, I think I'm not saying we should kill the AEC Hackathon. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a short-sighted thing. But I think they're only part of a bigger puzzle. And there's a proposal that I'm going to make at the end of this that sort of address that. And so we have an opportunity with the hackathon to get a lot of smart people together to look at these issues and to tackle them. And sometimes they're not always complete. Sometimes it's a thread. Sometimes it's an experiment and it leads to something else. And like I said, sometimes it's just something a company then adopts internally and is able to use. Sometimes it leads to a company launching on its own and providing a product to the industry at large. But I think one of the things we tend to forget or we need to focus on more is it something that people can use and want to use? And by can use and want to use, not just that there's a tool that they can download and use, but are they allowed to use it? You know, is the situation, the process, the business they're in allowing them to use it? Is their knowledge and their expertise in using the tools allowing them to use it? Do they really want to use it? Is it become a hindrance? Does it become one extra thing that they have to know and learn? You know, we need to ask these questions more and more. And I think, you know, this also bleeds into the realm of user experience and user interfaces, of the human dimension of organizations, of saying, you know, understanding those motivations behind the people who actually have to use these things is a very important way of addressing how these things are built or what technology is actually used. So down the rabbit hole we go, right? And my first counterpoint is technology is not really the problem. And I'm not trying to be antithetical or anything, but what I'm trying to say is that it's not the only problem. You can't just flip a switch with a piece of technology and it solves all of it. So we are awash in technology. There are so many options out there. If we look at just the BIM world, and this is a BIM world where the thing that all of these applications have in common is that they support IFC, right? They support a means of exchanging data between the different platforms and file formats. That's great. For every one of these, chances are there's probably at least 100 more technologies out there within our industry universe that address all kinds of different workflows and use cases, right? And I think if you look back at the hackathons, you see that a lot of the focus has been on BIM, it's been on computational design, it's been on machine learning and AI, there's IoT, there's VR, robotics, drones, and that's great. But that's a small part of the use cases that are out there. And you know, you can go through and keep listing and look back at all the different technologies that are out there, the companies that have sprung up and said, well, here's how we can address that. So we also have to recognize that none of these issues are issues in and of themselves, you know, completely separate from any of the others. They're connected in many different ways, right? They either have dependencies or they have connections that have enabling properties to them. Maybe they're derivatives of one or the other. And I think the thing that I always run into, and it just drives me crazy, and part of it is because I come from a background of appreciating standards, of being involved in standards groups and all that, is, you know, people not appreciating the value of using things that have already been not just built, but codified in a way that there's a consensus agreement, this is the best way moving forward, right? Standards are great because you have, and I think that they're great where you step back for a moment and reframe them as to what their use is. They're not meant to be a hindrance. Standards can be seen as a constraint that gives you the freedom to then focus on the things you really want to focus on, right? If somebody has already figured out how to make a connection between a bunch of different tools, why should I come up with a different technology in order to do that? Why can't I use that one? And it better, I have a technology that has not just been accepted by 1 or 2 or 100 other people, but has been accepted at a national, international level. Doesn't that make my job easier in order to implement that technology in order to make these connections? And also increase the opportunity for whatever it is I develop to be used by other people. And these organizations, these standards also, rely on a participation from a broad spectrum of people in order to get that consensus, in order to say, these are the best common denominators that we agree on in order to make this work. Not the least common denominators, but the best common denominators. So with so much technology available, with so much of it out there, do we really know what's out there and what to use and what we need to really create? And I think this is another thing that when people walk into an AEC hackathon, they already have in their minds about what they want to do and how they want to do it and what they see is available to them in order to get it done. As I said before, I used to work for a company called Vectorworks. We were a competitor of Autodesk. We had a tool it's still available. It's competitive to Revit. But we'd go into so many different conventions and trade shows, and people would have no idea who we were. No idea. And Vectorworks is sold on a global scale. I believe it has official representation in over 35 nations, well-developed nations. It includes most of Asia, most of Europe, and the United States and Canada. But why didn't anybody ever hear of it? And I think a large part of it is that we very quickly, when we see something or we have something in front of us, when a solution is provided, to prevent burnout, to prevent being overwhelmed, we block everything out. We said, okay, here it is, right? Here it is. Why do I need to worry about Pepsi if I have Coke? I don't have to worry about 15 different kinds of soda out there. I have what I need. This is what I'm going to do, right? And I think, the problem with that is then you've already begun to limit what a possible solution is, what strategies there are in creating it. Also, is my idea unique, right? Maybe somebody else has already figured this out before and I just need to go and do the research to go figure out if it has, or did they do a good job? Is it something I can improve on, right? And I think that one of the biggest things too, and one of the things we continue to struggle is how can we learn from other people's mistakes and successes? We are one of the last industries globally to digitize, to say that we need to become more data-centric, more digitally enabled process, faster, more efficient by using technology. One of the last. Even agriculture, they're doing things with drones, with satellites, with GIS systems, with moisture sensing technology, with all kinds of predictive AI and machine learning technologies that allow the growth of crops and the husbandry of animals to be more efficient and have a greater value, right? And why are we so far behind? Why aren't we learning? And then why do we think we have to come up with something? Why do we think we always have to invent that thing which solves the accounting problem or the supply chain problem, or the simulation or virtualization problem? Chances are it's probably already been done, especially look to automotive and aerospace and others, and product manufacturing. Why aren't we doing it more? Why don't we learn from those failures and mistakes? So the second counterpoint, right? That technology is not really the solution either. And what do I mean by that? So again, from my past experiences, I find a lot of times that when people talk about solutions, they very quickly begin to navigate in a channel that says, okay, well, I have a vendor that's provided a solution. And by the way, that solution is connected to this other tool, and this other tool, and this other tool, and another tool. And if I stay within that channel, if I stay within that ecosystem, I could have all of these things. Oh, but I might be missing those other things, but that's okay. I'm not going to do those other things. Not that I need to do those other things. So how do I get away from it? It's like, oh, no, I just won't do those, right? And so these boundaries have occurred. They still occur. They're still there. There's much effort that's been taken on, and on lots of different companies, and I appreciate the efforts. But there's still sort of a mentality at a very high level that says, you know, for us to be successful, we have to maintain these boundaries and these ecosystems. And I don't think that's true anymore. If we look at the larger computing industry, we see it's not true anymore, right? Microsoft made a significant change when Satya Nadella took over, right? And the biggest change was that Microsoft products should be anywhere and everywhere. They should be accessible anyways. It shouldn't be tied to Windows. It should be the same experience for using Word, whether it's on a Windows machine, a Windows laptop, a Windows tablet, a iOS tablet, an Android tablet, whatever. That's an amazing when you think about it versus what it used to be, right? And that's made them even bigger than they were before, is looking at the cloud and saying, well, we can do the cloud too. We can be one of the competitors in the cloud. We can offer those services. That's been transformative. Another aspect is this idea of interoperability. Everybody moans and groans when we talk about interoperability. Oh yeah, I can connect those two things. That's great. Am I connecting them using it at an API level? And you know, one of the things that I talk about with buildingSMART is that, you know, APIs are great, but if all of my open APIs are simply one company saying, well, just use my API to connect your tool and we'll all be fine. So one person has all the power, all these other companies have to connect to it. And then if that company decides to change something significantly, but you know, all these other companies have to do all this work in order to change their interoperability again. And that's not the same as having a many-to-many or an unknown interoperability, right? Having an open interoperability that says, listen, I don't know who I'm connecting to. I don't know what's possibly going on there. It could be 100 different people. It could be competitors. It could be, you know, co-conspirators or allies. But a truly open interoperability would just mean that it's available to anybody anytime, and I could use that technology. And I make the interoperability is about being content-centric rather than tool-centric, right? And that's what I think is the problem with a lot of these APIs, is that they're tool-centric. Yeah, I'm moving data around, but I'm moving data around only within the context of that particular tool, rather than focusing on the data itself. And then, you know, we also run into this idea that sometimes the solution is more complex than the problem, and that's a problem, right? And sometimes it's unavoidable because of the nature of the parts and the pieces and even the tools that are available in order to fix these things. So, you know, again, we have to reflect some more, and we have to begin to ask those questions. You know, what am I aware of? You know, I may not be aware of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So how do I reach out? How do I get a better understanding of what's available out there? And how do I know what other ideas are there? I think, you know, AEC Hackathon is a great example, and I think the resource of YouTube and having documentation that says, oh, this is what somebody else did before, maybe I don't really need to tackle it. Or maybe they tackled it, but they only went so far, and I can take that further and build off of that. And, you know, build on credit and being able to say, you know, yeah, we recognize what somebody did before, but I think we can go further and we can do better. And I think that's what really leads to this idea of you know, changing and not constantly trying to reinvent everything. You know, innovation doesn't always have to be starting from scratch, right? And then, of course, you know, learning from everybody else, as I said before, is our problems aren't unique in our industry. They're not focused on one particular process or aspect. It's not just about design. We're talking about entire life cycles. So what is the problem? And, you know, I think the best way to state it is that we are our own problem. We stand in our own way. And it's not just one simple thing, right? Because human beings are complex and we're messy, as I said before. We're subjectively messy. And there's lots of things that we do as human beings. We have cultural biases and we have cultural issues, especially within the building industry, this whole concept of trust. Right? Why is it that we have such antagonism between all these different disciplines? And can a technology really solve that problem of that distrust? No. Can a process? Maybe, but then you have to look at it and say, okay, well, where does that distrust start from? Where is its origins? And then how do I change that dynamic so that that distrust, that antagonism is removed and moving forward. If I look at legal constructs, one of the biggest things that we have to understand is IPD hasn't taken off as much as we thought IPD was going to take off. For those of you who don't know, integrated project delivery, which is essentially, wrapping, saying, BIM is a process, has all these capabilities, but as a process, it also requires that the project team act as a team, that I don't have several different contracts, with each other, but instead I have a project team that's essentially contracted to the project, not to the owner. But that by law is not enabled in public projects, which are a significant portion of what gets built in this world. So how do we change those policies and those laws in order to enable it to happen? We have to look at our own practices every day. I think one of the things I like to tease people all the time is, especially architects and contractors, is that they all feel like they're doing their thing uniquely, and that uniqueness is a value. And the truth of the matter is, there's probably about 3 ways to do anything, especially in business, and that your unique way of doing it, your proprietary company secrets, are probably just a slight variation that you learned from somebody else before you applied it to whatever you're doing. And those were, and somebody else learned from somebody else, and they're all derivatives, and the derivatives maybe to the nth degree. So we have to step back and say, is the uniqueness the value, or is my competence the value? Is with the quality that I bring the value? Is my service the value, right? And I think that when you rethink about that, that makes a big significant difference and a change in how then we approach processes and how we use technology in these processes. We can reduce the number of derivations in a process and just say, if we all agree that this is the way we're going to do it, then we just do it that way. Operations, why are we doing all this anyways? And I think ultimately is what gets done, and then how does the life cycle of a building work? And how does it become more efficient? And it's value driven, and it has to operate and think about issues of the environment. We have to look at economics, cost versus value. What is ROI? Too many times people are just focused on, well, what's this costing me up front? And never think about, well, what's it going to cost me in the long run? If I spend $15 on a cheap light fixture now versus I could have spent $45 for the expensive one, but over the life cycle of that $15 light fixture, it cost me $120 versus the $45 one, which only cost me $50. I should have spent the more money up front, because over the life cycle of the building, it would have been just cheaper to do. And we're starting to do that more and more. We're starting to do things like life cycle cost analysis and carbon footprints and all of that stuff. But why isn't it a part of everyday practice now? What needs to change in order to do that? We know we have technologies available to do it. What needs to change in order for that to happen? Academics. We still have a lot of ivory tower mentality in academics. And this shows up in disciplines, after everyone graduates, right? That antagonism between the different domains and disciplines. So how do we change the academic structure in order to make that happen? How do we make cross-disciplinary education the norm for our industry, especially? At the University of Texas, I have one of the top 10 computer engineering, computer science schools in the nation. I've got one of the top 15 architecture schools in the nation, and they don't talk to each other. A construction management school is highly regarded. They don't talk to the architects. They do talk to the computer science people, though, to a limited degree, but they do. And those students a lot of times utilize what's available in computer engineering systems. But why is it much less of an issue for the architecture and the design community? I don't understand that, especially in this day and age. As I said, with environment, environment's related to operations, but when we talk about these issues, they're also process and they're value driven too, right? They're not just solving things from a technology, making technologies more efficient, but we also have to look at where our values are in trying to address these issues. Do I want to leave something behind better than when I found it? Shouldn't I? Do I have to look to the next generation, a future generation I know nothing about? What am I leaving behind for them? And then there's the idea of standards, is another problem. There are plenty of standards out there. I showed you a small fraction of what's out there, that the organizations that are out there creating these things. But the question becomes is, why aren't they being adopted and implemented? Why do people, leave them alone? The US, we're notorious for this. And our industry is even more notorious for this. Saying, oh, there's a standard, I don't care, this is the way I do it. Or, oh, the standard is just getting in the way. As I said before, it should be seen as not as a obstacle constraint, but as a constraint that actually frees you up because it's taken care of. Somebody's already made that decision, it works, now I just move forward and go ahead, right? As an architect, building codes a lot of times kind of suck and might get in the way of my aesthetic direction, but they're there. They're a constraint that I have to deal with. And so just like any other constraints that are given in terms of budget or the client's desires in terms of aesthetics or functionality, whatever, those should be just seen as, okay, and I don't have to worry about that. I know I have to work within these boundaries. And I think that the other key thing with standards is we have this idea of what a standard is. And a lot of times it's a common practice. It's a de facto standard because, oh, it's just the way everybody does it. But it doesn't have an actual provenance as a standard because it isn't enveloped in a formal and legal way as being a standard, as having consensus effort where people participate and go through the discussion and the debate and work out those best common denominators and then adopt them on a whole and say, okay, this is what we all should be using. Rather than just a bunch of people saying, oh, well, it's probably, it's the lowest threshold possible. We'll just do that. And because everybody does it, it's just the standard. I don't believe that. I don't think it should be that way, right? It's the wrong way to move forward. So, again, stepping back to that human perspective, all of those are problems, but really they get back to the core of it, and that gets back to the core of people, right? Our behavior and our psychologies, how we use our judgment, how we think of ourselves, what are our goals, what are our desires, what is our morality, what drives us to do things, how do we feel about our place, in the context of our families, as ourselves, our families, within companies, within a social order or social group, whether that's at the city or state or national or international level. How do we approach relationships? Are we approaching relationships openly? Are we always suspicious? Do we have a prejudice that says, you know what? They don't get anything out of me until I get something out of them, right? Or am I more trusting? Am I willing to say, hey, this is what I have to offer? It may not be a lot, but it is what I have to offer, and I'm willing to learn more and do more. And then I think, also opening ourselves up to this idea of vision, right? How do I think bigger than just solving this problem today? Because ultimately, whatever I'm working on now might be a remedial solution. It might solve that particular symptom or that particular problem. But as I said before, if you look back and you say, well, is it just my problem, or is this a problem everybody else has? And if everybody else has the same problem, are they dealing with it the same way? And if they're not dealing with it the same way, why aren't they dealing the same way? And then begin to express that context out and say, okay, then how do we get together and we solve those issues? How do we identify them correctly? And then how do we identify what the core of those problems really are? And then use technology or changes in process, use psychology, use these means to make those changes and be transformative. So, the last three realizations, behavior is really the key to making these changes. I can come up with a tool that connects things. I can come up with a tool that enables things, that makes things quicker, that reformats things, that sucks it out of one platform and another. That's great. But if somebody's not going to use it or doesn't want to use it, that makes a big difference, right? Especially if I want to see it used to scale. And I think also stepping back and saying, what do I know? What is my expertise worth? For a particular problem or for a particular context. Who do I also have to talk to? I think we should be bringing more psychologists in and behavioral scientists, and we should be bringing in more lawyers and more people, financiers and things at these low levels and talking about these issues and saying, well, Why are you dealing with it this way? Or how do you propose we fix these things, right? Why does development happen a particular way? And a financier will tell you exactly from the perspective why it happens, and you know, it comes down to dollars. It comes down to return on investment. But then say, well, what if you change your perspective from our point of view and say, well, what do we need to invest and what do we need to get out of it as well? And begin to share those stories and those ideas and see, oh, well, maybe somebody didn't have the solution, or I don't know all the answers. And crap, my solution really just kind of, you know, screwed the other guy. And I think we need to have those conversations. And then realizing that with all the work that we do with these hackathons, we're really just sort of nibbling around the edges, right? Yes, we can start companies. Yeah, we can, you know, produce solutions that everybody uses a common practice. But are we really being transformational? Are we really addressing the entire industry from top to bottom, from entire life cycle of a project? You know, are we having that effect that says we can do better, we can do more, and we can do it with more value and a greater sense of achievement and happiness for everybody who's involved? So I'm going to wrap this up with a challenge, right? And the challenge is moving forward, not just in the future, but even looking forward with this hackathon, is saying, you know, how can we use technology to enable these larger transformative changes, right? How do we identify what the problem really is? Yeah, I'm trying to connect two tools together. Okay, but what's really the issue? You know, am I trying to design something? Am I trying to, because I'm trying to suck information from one place to another? Why is that information necessary? Am I just dealing with just these two tools? Is it an informational flow problem that's going to happen regardless? Has somebody else already thought of that? Maybe there's a standard out there that already addresses this issue, and we should just be using that. And the tools should be adhering to the standard instead of having to come up with something else. Who should be involved, right? Again, as I said before, you know, maybe we're not looking at a wide enough range of collaborators. I think my experience from the hackathon back in 2016 was great because we had a computer scientist on board. We had me, who was, you know, an industry peer. And then we had a bunch of people who were in different parts of a larger contracting organization who had different perspectives of operations and execution and project delivery and all of that. And it was interesting because I had an understanding of what could be used on the technology standards side of things and my experience of actually implementing it. We had a computer scientist who was thinking about it in an even bigger context, like, why are you guys doing it this way? When we did it for computer vision and when we did it for, you know, gaming, this is how we did all this. And just thinking, man, you guys are crazy because we solved that problem 10, 15 years ago. And then the people whose boots are on the ground who have to deal with this every day going, okay, well, you know, this is just what we've been given and this is what we know. And, you know, we're a huge organization that's a global contractor. How do we, you know, how do we fix this in a way that's usable and manageable tomorrow? And then this idea of vision is thinking bigger, looking bigger. Don't just settle for it being that one thing, right? Is it scalable enough? Is it far enough? Can I be transformative instead of remedial? And to end with these two examples. One is, you know, if I look at the past, when people would say, oh, to do BIM, all I have to do is buy Revit, right? But that's not really the solution because you're not really looking at the problem, right? And the problem essentially is BIM is addressing is process, is how do we make this more fluid, more data-centric, more collaborative? How do we spread the risk and the reward around? How do we add value to the delivery of the project, to the project for its entire life cycle? You know, instead of saying, oh, well, if I just adopt this tool, if I just adopt this one vendor way of doing things, you know, it will magically solve all our problems if we just use their entire suite of solutions. That's not how this works. Because if they don't have a solution, I still have a problem, don't I? Or do I just ignore it and say, oh, no, we just won't do that? And I think that a lot of times that does happen. So instead, a challenge, an example of a challenge is to say, okay, how do I legalize BIM or digital twins and use technology in that enabling role of legalizing it, right? So, you know, these issues, as I list here, right? And they're not small issues. And in some ways, we have technologies and standards behind these very things that address them, and we just need to execute them. But what's really at the core of this is that we have a policy structure, a culture, processes that are ensconced in laws that are hard to change, because the people that are involved in making those decisions and making those laws aren't expert in any of these fields. They have to rely on all of those other people in order to help them make the right decisions, to make the changes necessary for that transformation to occur. So liability and tort reform, removing those obstacles of using IPD over design, bid, build, which is usually mandated for public projects, right? How do you deal with data privacy and anonymity and encryption? What's the best way of doing that? How do you deal with security? And then how do we better structure the financial systems under a legal structure to encourage investment, right? To get a better return on investment, and instead of people just sucking things up for a profit margin, saying, I got mine, I'm okay. As long as I got mine, the rest of you are on your own. And then how do we invest more in knowledge and training for everybody? It does us no good if we have the top 10% of the people in our industry really smart and know all this stuff, and the other 90% just go, well, I don't know how to make any of this work. Where do I start? And I'm the guy on the ground that actually has to get things done. So how do we train those people into doing something? And so moving forward, I think I want to have everybody have this in mind. And I think, Damon and I talked about this before, is that, this would be a great idea for even another hackathon, is to say, okay, the challenge of the hackathon is you can't create a technical solution in and of itself unless it addresses a process that is bigger, that is transformational. I mean, that's what I posed to him. To me, that would be highly interesting. How do I go out and engage a bunch of different stakeholders and say, okay, we know the change that needs to take place, but now how do I convince you that that change is necessary? And then how do we make that change through all the systems, whether they're political systems or legal systems or, business systems or whatever we have, and make those changes and do that. And then bring in more people. Bring in not just the technologists and not just the industry experts, but bring in those other people that we're connected to, from law to project managers from other industries to psychologists and human behavioralists, and get their input in order to make this happen. And doing a hack on ourselves, not from a technology point of view, but from that way that we interact and we do things. So with that, we've got time for questions.